He was the greatest of all batsmen. He was perhaps the greatest sportsman the world has seen. Ill health and carping criticism could not diminish him. The most famous and the most admired Australian of all time, Don Bradman, is preeminent amongst ESPN's legends of cricket. It was the most famous dismissal in the history of cricket. In 1948, Don Bradman strode to the crease to play the last of his 80 Test match innings.
Then a special chair on the field.
He needed just 4 to finish, with a career average of 100. Incredibly, the greatest batsman of all time finished with a duck.
I was not aware that it was going to be my last innings. Neither was I aware at that stage that I only wanted 4 runs to have a Test match average of 100. And it was a pretty emotional occasion because Yardley called all his fieldsmen around and they all gave me 3 cheers before I took block.
I was up the other end. Eric Hollies and bowled him a beautiful leg spinner. Then he bowled in the wrong and right on about the same spot. And Don played forward, and he might have got the tiniest bit of edge, but it was well delivered and it hit the off stump.
The whole team was hoping that he would settle in and make one of his big scores, because he certainly deserved it. He'd been a wonderful player for Australia, marvellous ambassador for Australia too, and I think he deserved to make a reasonable score anyway in his last appearance on English soil, where he'd made so many runs in the past.
I was a trifle unlucky in the sense that I played at the ball and actually hit it on the inside edge of the bat and pulled it onto the stumps. But I think if I'd taken a little bit more care, I might have got away with it. But that's one of the things that happens in the game of cricket.
Even casual followers of cricket know precisely Bradman's final average, 99.94, almost 40 runs higher than the next best, Graham Pollock. But what manner of batsman was this run-making phenomenon?
Don Bradman was the greatest cricketer I ever saw, and I would say that he had the greatest repertoire of aggressive, damaging strokes that ever a batsman carried. In fact, I am quite certain he was the best cricketer ever to walk onto a cricket ground in any part of the whole wide world.
You're still one of the best players of your era. When you look at Bradman's accomplishments, I mean, it was in an era of, the uncovered wicket scene was astonishing. That, you know, you couldn't even imagine some of the tracks that, you know, he must have played on, and, you know, the poise and the temperament, composure, tenacity that he must have displayed.
The thing that stood out above anything else was his footwork. I never saw anybody get into position or move his feet around as much as Bradman did, and he always seemed to have, you know, like, he could actually make a movement with his feet and then realise he was in the wrong position and change again. I don't know of any player I ever saw that could move his feet twice. It's like the supreme footwork of a boxer.
My personal theory about Bradman is that he was so good because he's so damn smart. He's really intelligent, really works things out, has great attention to detail. Just a very, very sharp mind, very focused, very clever. And I think he just concentrated on what was at hand, and he worked things out in a very intelligent way.
Bradman was also a superb fielder at cover or near the boundary. But it was his prolific run-getting that set Bradman apart. The almost near certainty that he was going to perform, even in a time of great uncertainty.
We didn't believe any ball couldn't be scored off. I think that's the thing. You know, you get blokes out there and they say, well, if I've got to wait an hour for a ball to score off, well, I'll wait. But they never think about thinking that every ball in an over can be scored from. I think that was Bradman's philosophy, really.
Bradman's importance to the people of Australia during the Depression was enormous, and I think one of the factors behind that was that he gave to them a sense of certainty. at a time when there was absolutely no certainty in their lives.
As a young boy, Don Bradman famously honed his skills, batting with a single stump and golf ball.
I used to play away for ages out there on my own, and it was just fun. Never entered my head that I was probably training my eyesight and coordinating my movements. That didn't register at all in those days. Now, of course, I can realise what the significance of it was.
I met him first in 1925, long before either one of us had ever been heard of in top-class cricket. Appropriately enough, we met in the middle of a country cricket ground at Bowral. He batted throughout the day, which was about 4 hours' play, and at the end of that, he had 234 not out.
After success in grade and shield cricket, Bradman played his first Test match in Brisbane in 1928. Much was expected of him. After making scores of 18 and 1, Bradman was dropped for the next Test. Recalled for the third, he made 79 and 112.
Australian cricket was desperately in need of young players, and Bradman was probably the pick of a group of young players. Archie Jackson was another one, and Stan McCabe was a couple of years younger. So that when Bradman came into the team for the first Test and failed twice, I think there was a great disappointment that Bradman was he was going to be the next big thing. So Bradman then came back into the side for the third Test and scored 79 and 112. And I think the significance of the century in the second innings can't be underrated, because that was the youth of Australia, if you like, the next generation rising up.
In England in 1930, there were those who doubted Bradman's technique on seaming wickets.
We went over as, I suppose you'd say, the underdogs of that tour. We'd been badly defeated in 28-9 in Australia. And we were a very young side, hadn't had much experience under English conditions. I think it was generally thought that we would lose the 1930 series. But I believe our players got used to the conditions quickly, and we improved rapidly as the tour went on.
Bradman's performances in England that season were astonishing. He made 974 runs in the series, including a world record 334, with 309 of those scored in a single day.
Bradman made cricket history on his first tour of England in 1930. As a boy, not yet past his very early 20s, he scored 974 Test runs in that series, a score which still stands.
He had a bat in his den downstairs, which was the bat he got 254 against England, which he always reckoned was his greatest innings. And honest to goodness, there was a dent in the middle of the bat. You couldn't believe that a bat could have a hole in the centre of it from just making that constant contact right where it should be.
In England there, he made such an enormous reputation that English journalists thought that England's chances of recovering the Ashes were absolutely nil until something was done to deal with Bradman's enormous ability.
After Bradman had dominated series against the West Indies and South Africa, England arrived in Australia in 1932, armed with a plan to defeat him: bodyline.
There's been a lot of suggestions as to what the prime motivation for bodyline was, but really there's no doubt that it was to stop Bradman. The England hierarchy had come to the conclusion that if Bradman was going to score average 100, that they were going to struggle to win. So they came up with this tactic of basically bowling at the body with 5, 6, 7 people on the leg side.
Once I saw the personnel of the team which had been chosen to come to Australia, I said immediately, we are in for a barrage of bumpers on this tour. But at that time, we never had any idea at all that it would be used in conjunction with the leg side field.
Bodyline was successful, inasmuch as Bradman's average suffered. and he made just 1 century for the series. He averaged an excellent but less than superhuman 56.57.
We were very upset, of course, with the tactics they were using. The difficulty was how you're going to counteract them. You see, with 7 fieldsmen on the leg side and the ball is being directed towards your body, there is virtually nowhere to go. There's nothing you can do. It was obvious that it was something that was not going to last. It only had a limited life before it stopped. And we were all very relieved, I think, when the season was over and we got back to normal cricket again.
In 1934, Bradman struggled in the first 3 tests before making 304 and 244 in the final 2.
Throughout those early games, Bradman showed a great strain. He didn't play like the Bradman that we knew. We came then to the 4th test at Leeds. Bradman went in, and the first ball he took, he stepped in and he hit it straight past wide of mid-on, the best shot in the whole game, and as soon as he played it, you could hear the sigh of relief in the Australian dressing room. They got, he's right, he's back.
Before the Australians left England, Bradman was felled by an attack of appendicitis and then by peritonitis. For a time, grave fears were held for his life.
I was very unwell when I got to England, and I was still very off colour in the early matches of the tour. I knew I wasn't right, but nobody could find out what was the matter with me. This was really the background why I was not succeeding in the early matches. The diagnosis was that I had appendicitis, and it turned into peritonitis. And in those days, you didn't have penicillin, you didn't have the modern antibiotics, and it was a very serious business.
In 1935, with his health improved, Bradman moved to Adelaide and began learning the stockbroking business.
I was always concerned that I did not want to lead the life of a professional cricketer dependent on cricket for a living. I wanted to get some business career of my own that was outside sport. And Mr. Hodgetts, who was a member of the Australian Cricket Board and a leading figure in the South Australian Cricket Association, approached me and said if I came to Adelaide, he would give me a contract which would guarantee me a position with his firm for 6 years, would allow me time off to play cricket, and would teach me the business of stock and share broking. Now, this was an offer that was too good to refuse.
Bradman was made captain for the 1936-37 Ashes series. He lost his first 2 tests as skipper, but then led a remarkable fight back to win the series 3-2. He quickly earned a reputation as an outstanding strategist.
I think he was the best tactical captain I've ever played under. He knew all about the opposition batsman. He placed his field accordingly. He remembered things that happened in previous matches. When the new ball was due, the bowlers were rested and ready, and he had a wonderful appreciation of the conditions. I'd say in the vernacular that he just never missed a trick on the field.
In the 1939-40 season, a record 77,000 went to see him play in a Sheffield Shield match in Melbourne. Huge crowds followed Bradman's every innings.
The story goes when he used to play at Headingley at Leeds that a lot of people at Barnsley's 30 miles away from Headingley. A lot of people from Barnsley used to walk it to watch Sir Donald Bradman bat. That's the great attraction he was.
During World War II, Bradman enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force, but he was invalided out within a year. There was serious doubt about his returning to cricket at war's end.
At that time, I honestly did not think that I would play first-class cricket again. But you want to cast your mind back to the euphoria that existed in the community with the end of the war, and particularly in England. They were very, very anxious to get cricket started again, to give them some relief from the conditions that they'd endured for several years.
In 46, 47, when England came out, he was very reluctant to play again. And I think he only played again then because he felt it was the right thing to do for cricket. And then that season having gone quite well, obviously swan song in 1948 in England was a wonderful way to go out.
The final 3 years of Bradman's cricket career were a golden period for Australian cricket. Bradman's last series in England in 1948 will be long remembered for the unbeaten string of results achieved by the Invincibles.
It is one of the great sides in history. The Australians usually say that the three great sides we had was 1902, 1921 and 1948. It's rather a pity we can't go back into history and stage a match between them to see how they'd get along. I saw the 1921 players and I know how good they were. And I'd be very happy to think we were classed on a level with them.
Yes, it was a sad story for England, but there were very bright scenes at the Oval where everything was forgotten for the moment except the importance of paying tribute to Don Bradman.
And so cricket's greatest batsman retired. He was knighted in 1949, the first Australian to be knighted for services to cricket.
Yardley, who has described Don as the greatest cricketer of all time, called on the crowd to give him 3 special cheers, which they did with a will.
Sir Donald Bradman served as an Australian selector and as a South Australian delegate to the Cricket Board of Control. In 1960, he became the first ex-player to be appointed chairman of the board.
Don Bradman's influence on Australian cricket goes far beyond the 20 years that he played the game, because he was an administrator then for over 30 years. He was an Australian selector for over 30 years and was in fact a selector when Australia played the West Indies in 1960-61. He was chairman of selectors at the time, a series which is widely credited as being one of the most exciting, interesting, invigorating series of all time.
Sir Donald Bradman lived to the age of 92. His death in February 2001 was received with deep sadness across the cricket world. Don Bradman played in 52 Test matches. He made 6,996 runs at an average of 99.94, including 29 centuries. He made 12 Test double centuries, more than any other player. In all first-class cricket, he played 234 matches for 28,067 runs at an average of 95.14, including 117 centuries.
I love a little story that Dennis Compton and Don Bradman were sitting at the Adelaide Oval one day, and it was in, I think it must have been about the sort of 86, 87 series or something, and Compo asked the Don how he thought he'd get on against this England bowling attack, and he said, I'd probably average 50. And Compo said to him, he said, average 50, Don? He said, you average 99.9. He said, yeah, but I am 85. You know, so, you know, he obviously had a sense of humour right up to the end of his life.
Sir Donald Bradman is the most famous Australian ever. Not just happened to be the greatest cricketer of all time, but the most famous Australian ever. It was the closest thing to perfection, and yet he wasn't perfect the way he played. Everyone taught you to hold the bat together and hold your hands like that. He used to bat with his hands apart. He's the first one that really worked the game out, really worked out how to play the game, statistically wise, and keeping the ball on the ground. 6,996 runs. He only hit 6 Test sixes in his time, where you look at Gilchrist, he hit close to 87. So, an amazing player. He hit a lot of fours, kept the ball on the carpet. Whether it's a sticky wicket, a wet wicket, or a wicket was absolutely flat, he had all the answers.
What a great player Sir Donald Bradman was. You've only got to look at his figures, and his figures show that he's the greatest batsman that's ever lived and the greatest batsman. I can't see anyone ever in history being as good as him, as good as Bradman.
He was a very, very private person, Bradman. He didn't like the intrusion on his private life that the fame brought. That's not to say he was a recluse. He's called a recluse. He wasn't a recluse. When you met him, he was open, quite light-hearted, entertaining, great sense of humour. He had a great shout of a laugh, and he liked telling stories and hearing stories.
I remember talking to Sir Don, and when we asked him in today's era, what would you have averaged? He said, around about 70. I said, why, Sir Don? Why do you think 70? He said, I'm 90 today, so that's not bad for a 90-year-old man.
I've never forgotten what he said, that, everyone is a custodian of the game. It's up to each player, it's up to the media, it's up to the administrators to preserve the traditions, the values, the heritage of the game and play it in its fair spirit. Be competitive, go out there to win, of course, but do it the right way.
There's so much been written and said about him, it's hard to sort of make a definitive sort of answer to what Don Bradman means. He's the ultimate icon for cricket.
Bradman is an icon, and nobody has made a greater contribution to cricket than Don Bradman. The fact that he, at times he's written anything up to 500 letters, personal letters each week. His work for charity is, people don't know it, but I do, because I'm on the Bradman Foundation and things like that. And you really got to understand the work that he did behind the scenes. Always anonymous, but absolutely a great contributor. He was probably one of the greatest Australians that we've ever known.
Universally recognised as Australia's greatest sporting figure of the 20th century, Sir Donald Bradman emerged during the Great Depression when his country needed a hero. He remained an Australian hero for the rest of his days. He is the greatest of all ESPN's legends of cricket.